Here's what separates six-figure closers from everyone else. They don't just know English words, they use them like native speakers. But here's the problem. Most international closers are stuck in what I call the academic trap. You can recite vocabulary lists perfectly, but when a prospect asks you a question, you sound robotic. You overthink every phrase, pause too long, and lose the natural flow that builds trust. The solution? A proven 4-step learning cycle that I've used to help closers go from awkward conversations to closing deals worth over $10,000 in English-speaking markets. Most international closers think they speak good English until they hear their first sales call recording, and it's brutal. You know exactly what I mean if you've ever listened back to yourself trying to close a deal. The words are technically correct, but something feels off. You sound like you're reading from a script instead of having a real conversation. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. I was watching a roleplay between Dylan and Jeremy, where Jeremy was playing the prospect with back pain. Jeremy speaks excellent English. He knows all the vocabulary, understands grammar perfectly, and can write business emails that sound professional. But the moment he started responding to sales questions, everything changed. When Dylan asked him about his pain level, Jeremy said, "I would characterize my discomfort as moderately severe, particularly in the lumbar region." Technically perfect English, zero sales effectiveness. A real prospect would say something like, "My back kills me," or "I can barely get out of bed some mornings." Jeremy's response immediately signaled that he wasn't a native speaker, which broke the natural flow of the conversation. This happens because most international closers learned English in academic settings. You studied grammar rules, memorized vocabulary lists, and practiced writing essays. But sales conversations don't follow textbook patterns. They're messy, emotional, and full of interruptions. When you default to academic language under pressure, you sound robotic. Here's the thing about robotic language. It kills trust instantly. Research shows that prospects make credibility judgments within the first 30 seconds of a conversation. They're not consciously analyzing your grammar or vocabulary. They're subconsciously picking up on whether you sound natural or artificial. When your language flow feels stilted, prospects sense something is off, even if they can't explain why. In that same roleplay, Jeremy continued using phrases like, "I have been experiencing this condition for approximately 6 months," instead of, "It's been bothering me for about 6 months." Every response reinforced the barrier between him and the prospect persona. The trainer had to stop the roleplay multiple times because Jeremy's language pattern was completely breaking the illusion of a real sales conversation. The impact goes way beyond just sounding awkward. When you speak in academic English during sales calls, you're creating psychological distance with your prospects. High-value prospects, especially in English-speaking markets, expect to hear natural, confident communication. They want to feel like they're talking to someone who understands their world, not someone who learned English from a textbook. This language barrier shows up in subtle ways that destroy rapport. You might say, "I would be happy to assist you," instead of, "I'd love to help you out." You use purchase instead of buy or grab. You say utilize instead of use. Each formal word choice builds a wall between you and the prospect. They start to feel like you're not one of them. The stakes get even higher when you're dealing with premium prospects. Someone considering a $10,000 investment wants to feel like they're talking to an expert who speaks their language naturally. When you sound academic, they question your real-world experience. They wonder if you actually understand their problems or if you're just reciting training materials. I've seen closers lose deals worth thousands of dollars because their English gave away that they weren't native speakers. The prospect never said anything directly, but the energy shifted. Trust levels dropped. Objections became harder to overcome. The same closer could have identical product knowledge and sales skills, but the language barrier made everything else less effective. Here's what makes this even more frustrating. You probably know the right words to use. You've heard native speakers say pain in the ass instead of significant inconvenience. You understand that totally sounds more natural than completely. But when you're in the middle of a high-pressure sales call, you default to the formal language patterns you learned in school. The problem compounds when you try to use sales techniques you learned from English-speaking trainers. You might understand the concept of building rapport, but you do it with phrases like, "I completely understand your position," instead of, "I totally get it." You know you should create urgency, but you say time-sensitive opportunity instead of limited time thing. The techniques are right, but the delivery kills their effectiveness. This creates a vicious cycle. You know you don't sound natural, so you become more careful with your words. The more careful you get, the more formal you sound. The more formal you sound, the more distance you create with prospects. Pretty soon, you're overthinking every sentence instead of focusing on the actual sales conversation. What's really happening here is that you're stuck in the first phase of the learning cycle. concrete experience. You're experiencing the problem firsthand every time you get on a sales call. You can feel the awkwardness when you speak. You notice prospects reacting differently to your language compared to native speakers. But recognizing the problem is just the first step. The breakthrough comes when you start to identify your specific academic trap moments. These are the exact phrases and patterns that give you away as a non-native speaker. For Jeremy, it was using medical terminology instead of casual descriptions. For other closers, it might be overusing transition phrases like furthermore or additionally instead of simple words like plus or also. You need to record yourself in different sales scenarios and listen for these patterns. Notice when you sound natural versus when you slip into textbook mode. Pay attention to which situations trigger your academic language. Is it when you're explaining features, handling objections, or asking for the close? This concrete experience gives you the raw material for improvement. But here's the key. Just being aware of these patterns isn't enough to fix them. You need a systematic approach that transforms academic knowledge into natural, instinctive communication. There's one moment in every sales call where your English either hooks the prospect or loses them forever. And it happens in the first 15 seconds. Watch what happens in that Dylan and Jeremy roleplay when they practice the opening. The trainer makes it crystal clear that the opening question is the only scripted part of the entire call. Everything else flows naturally from that first moment. But here's what most international closers miss. Knowing the words isn't the same as delivering them with power. Dylan starts with his opening question, and you can hear the uncertainty creeping in. His voice goes up at the end like he's asking permission instead of leading the conversation. The words are perfect, but the delivery screams, "I'm not confident in what I'm saying." That uncertainty hits the prospect's ears and immediately creates doubt about whether this person can actually help them. The trainer stops the roleplay right there. He knows that when you deliver your opening with hesitation, you're telling the prospect you're not a native speaker before you even get to the actual sales conversation. It's not about accent or vocabulary, it's about the energy behind the words. Native speakers don't question themselves when they ask a simple question. They just ask it and wait for the answer. Think about how a native English speaker would ask, "How's your back been treating you lately?" They'd say it with casual confidence, like they're asking about the weather. But when international closers try the same question, they often pause between words, emphasize the wrong syllables, or add unnecessary formality. Instead of sounding natural, they end up with something like, "How has your back been treating you recently?" The pauses kill the flow. Here's the thing about tonality. It trumps perfect grammar every single time when you're building rapport. A native speaker might say, "How's your back doing?" with a slight downward inflection that shows they're genuinely interested. They're not performing the question, they're having a conversation. But most international closers treat the opening like a test they need to pass instead of a natural interaction. The trainer worked with Dylan to inject certainty into his delivery. Not loud certainty, that sounds fake. Natural certainty. The kind where you know you belong in this conversation and you're here to help. When Dylan tried again, you could hear the difference immediately. Same words, completely different energy. The question landed with authority instead of uncertainty. This energy shift changes everything about how prospects perceive you. When you deliver your opening with genuine confidence, prospects subconsciously think this person knows what they're doing. When you deliver it with uncertainty, they think this person is reading from a script. The difference in closing rates between these two approaches is massive. Watch how Melik handles his opening in the trading offer roleplay. The trainer praised his delivery because it had what he called strong energy. Melik wasn't just saying the words, he was owning them. His voice carried conviction that immediately set a positive tone for the entire call. The prospect felt that energy and responded accordingly. But here's where it gets interesting. Most international closers focus on getting the words right when they should be focusing on the feeling behind the words. You can memorize the perfect opening question, but if you deliver it like you're unsure whether you're allowed to ask it, you've already lost the prospect's confidence. The trainer emphasized that this opening moment is about leadership, not perfection. When you ask your opening question with certainty, you're taking control of the conversation from the first second. You're telling the prospect, "I'm here to help you figure this out," instead of, "I hope you'll let me try to help you." This is where reflective observation becomes crucial. You need to listen to native speakers asking questions in natural conversations. Notice how they don't overthink their delivery. They ask what they want to know and wait for the answer. There's no second guessing, no unnecessary politeness, no academic formality, just direct, confident communication. The voice to impact ratio matters more than most people realize. You can have perfect pronunciation, but if your energy is flat, the question falls flat. You can have a slight accent, but if your energy is strong and confident, prospects respond positively. The trainer specifically mentioned this high voice to impact ratio as what separates professionals from amateurs. Here's what happens when you nail the opening delivery. The prospect immediately feels like they're talking to someone who understands their world. They don't consciously think this person sounds native. They just feel comfortable continuing the conversation. That comfort translates into trust, which translates into better responses to your questions throughout the call. But when you mess up the opening with uncertain delivery, you're fighting an uphill battle for the rest of the conversation. The prospect might not consciously notice your language patterns, but they'll feel slightly disconnected from you. They'll be more likely to give short answers, more likely to put up walls, more likely to end the call early. The trainer's coaching showed exactly how to fix this. He had Dylan practice the same opening question multiple times, focusing purely on the energy and conviction behind it. Not the words, those were already correct. Just the feeling. Each repetition sounded more natural, more confident, more like someone who belonged in a high-level sales conversation. This reflective observation process reveals something important about natural English usage. Native speakers don't think about grammar rules when they're talking. They're focused on the message and the feeling they want to convey. The words just flow naturally from that intention. When you can match that natural flow in your opening question, you've cracked the code for the entire conversation. The difference between amateurs and professionals isn't vocabulary or grammar knowledge. It's the ability to deliver simple questions with unshakable confidence that draws prospects into deeper conversation. Native English speakers have a secret weapon for making prospects feel their problems, and it's not what you think. Watch how the trainer handles Jeremy's back pain in that roleplay. He doesn't just ask, "How bad is it?" like most international closers would. Instead, he guides the conversation to quantify Jeremy's back pain in concrete emotional terms. He asks about the number of times Jeremy tweaked his back in the last week. He wants to know the intensity of the pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Every question is designed to make the problem feel more real and urgent. This is where most international closers completely miss the mark. They gather data instead of creating emotional experiences with their language. You hear them asking questions like, "Could you describe the frequency of your discomfort?" or "What would you estimate the severity to be?" They're collecting information, but they're not making the prospect feel anything. The words are technically correct, but they don't create the emotional impact that drives decisions. The trainer shows us something completely different. He's using abstract conceptualization, turning observations into actionable language principles. Watch how he takes Jeremy's casual mentions of back pain and transforms them into specific, measurable problems. He's not just gathering facts, he's building a case that makes inaction feel expensive and dangerous. Here's the technique that changes everything. Instead of asking, "How does this affect your work?" the trainer asks, "What happens if your back goes out during your biggest presentation this month?" Notice the difference? The first question gets you a generic answer about productivity. The second question makes the prospect visualize a specific disaster scenario. That's the power of using numbers and emotional language to make problems feel concrete. The trainer demonstrates this when he uses Jeremy's own words to frame questions about financial impact and personal cost. Jeremy mentions he's been dealing with this for months. The trainer immediately jumps on that timeline and asks, "So you've been losing sleep for 6 months straight?" He's taking Jeremy's casual mention and quantifying it into something that feels massive and urgent. This approach works because it makes the prospect do the math in their own head. When you ask, "How much money are you losing every week you can't perform at 100%?" you're not giving them numbers. You're making them calculate their own pain. That number they come up with hits different because it's their number, not yours. But here's what most international closers don't understand. Quantifying pain isn't about math. It's about making prospects feel the weight of inaction. The trainer doesn't care about the exact dollar amount Jeremy might lose. He cares about making Jeremy feel what it's like to keep living with this problem for another 6 months, another year, another 5 years. Watch how he escalates the timeline. First, he asks about last week, then this month. Then he projects into the future. What if you're still dealing with this next year? The progression makes the problem feel like it's growing instead of staying static. Each question adds weight to the consequences of doing nothing. The language patterns here are crucial for international closers to master. Instead of asking, what is the impact on your daily activities, you ask, what can't you do anymore because of this? The second version hits harder because it focuses on loss instead of abstract impacts. Loss feels more urgent than impact. Notice how the trainer frames the financial questions too. He doesn't ask, how much does this cost you? He asks, what's this already cost you over the past 6 months? Past tense makes the loss feel real and documented. Future tense makes it feel like a projection. Past tense creates urgency because the clock is already ticking. The emotional language component is what separates amateurs from professionals. When Jeremy says his back bothers him, the trainer doesn't accept that soft language. He pushes for stronger words. Bothers you or actually hurts? The word hurts carries more emotional weight than bothers. Every word choice either amplifies or diminishes the prospect's pain. This technique transforms from academic knowledge into instinctive application through practice. You start by recognizing the pattern. Soft problem language needs to be quantified and emotionally amplified. Then you practice the specific phrases that create this transformation. How many times instead of how often? What's this already cost you instead of what does this cost? What can't you do instead of how does this affect you? The trainer shows us that each question should make the problem feel bigger and more urgent than the last one. Start with frequency, move to intensity, then to financial impact, then to personal cost, then to future consequences. Each step builds on the previous one until the prospect feels like they can't afford not to solve this problem. Here's the breakthrough moment most international closers miss. The prospect isn't buying your solution. They're buying relief from their quantified pain. When you make that pain feel concrete and measurable, the solution becomes the obvious next step. The trainer doesn't have to sell Jeremy on fixing his back. He just has to make Jeremy feel the real cost of not fixing it. The specific language patterns for quantifying prospect pain using concrete, emotional terms become second nature when you practice them in real scenarios. You learn to catch soft language and immediately push for harder, more specific descriptions. You learn to take casual mentions and turn them into urgent problems. You learn to use the prospect's own words against their procrastination. But knowing these patterns isn't enough. You need to practice them in controlled environments where you can get feedback and refine your delivery until it feels natural. The highest paid closers never explain solutions. They do something completely different that makes prospects sell themselves. Watch what happens in that role play when the trainer emphasizes connecting dots for prospects rather than presenting information. He's not telling Jeremy what to think about his back pain, he's asking questions that make Jeremy reach his own conclusions. The trainer guides Jeremy to discover that his problem is expensive, getting worse, and needs immediate attention. Jeremy convinces himself, the trainer just provides the framework. This is where international closers completely miss the mark. They over-explain instead of using the subtle language patterns that guide prospects to their own conclusions. You hear them launch into product presentations, feature lists, and benefit explanations. They think more information equals more persuasion, but prospects don't buy because they understand your solution. They buy because they feel the weight of their problem. The specific moment in the role play where the trainer demonstrated the chef helping bake a cake analogy shows exactly how this works. The closer acts as a guide, helping the prospect discover the solutions themselves. You're not the chef making the cake, you're the chef helping them bake their own cake. This approach makes the prospect feel like they're in control of the decision-making process, which increases their commitment to taking action. Here's the principle that changes everything. Using prospects' own words to frame questions and maintain conversational control. The trainer takes Jeremy's casual mention of back pain and turns it into Jeremy's own argument for why he needs help. When Jeremy says, "It's been bothering me for months," the trainer doesn't say, "Our program fixes chronic pain." Instead, he asks, "So you've been dealing with this for months. What happens if you're still dealing with it next year?" Native speakers naturally guide conversations without prospects realizing they're being led. They pick up on small details and expand them into bigger problems. They use the prospect's own language to ask follow-up questions. They create a flow where each answer leads naturally to the next question. The prospect feels like they're having a normal conversation, not being sold to. Watch how the trainer handles Jeremy's responses about his back pain intensity. Jeremy mentions it's about a 7 out of 10 on bad days. The trainer doesn't explain how their program reduces pain levels. levels. Instead, he asks, what does a 7 feel like when you're trying to focus on important work? Now, Jeremy has to visualize himself struggling through his day with that pain level. The trainer connected Jeremy's number to Jeremy's daily experience. The language techniques that make prospects feel they're discovering solutions themselves are subtle but powerful. Instead of saying, you need to fix this, you ask, what would it mean for you if this was completely resolved? The prospect starts imagining the benefits instead of you listing them. Instead of explaining your process, you ask, what would have to happen for you to feel confident this could work? Now they're telling you what they need to hear. This connects directly to the abstract conceptualization phase of turning observations into repeatable patterns. You watch how native speakers guide conversations. You notice the specific phrases they use to redirect without being obvious. You see how they take the prospect's words and turn them into questions that create urgency. These observations become your new language patterns. The trainer shows us how to use open-ended questions that encourage prospects to articulate their needs and challenges. When he asks Jeremy, why are you not confident? He's prompting reflection that uncovers the root causes of the prospect's issues. This contrasts with leading questions, which can make the prospect feel manipulated and less likely to trust the salesperson. The goal is to empower the prospect to reach their own conclusions. Here's what most international closers don't understand about connecting language patterns. You're not just asking random questions. You're building a logical sequence where each answer makes the next question feel natural. Jeremy says his back pain affects his sleep. The trainer doesn't jump to solutions. He asks, how's your energy during the day when you're not sleeping well? Each question builds on the previous answer. The power of this approach is that prospects convince themselves. When Jeremy connects his back pain to poor sleep and poor sleep to low energy and low energy to poor work performance, he's building his own case for why he needs help. The trainer didn't present any of those connections. Jeremy discovered them through guided questions. Specific, quantifiable data becomes a powerful tool in guided discovery. When the trainer asks questions that prompt Jeremy to quantify his problems, such as the amount of money he's losing, he makes the issues more concrete and emotionally resonant. This approach helps Jeremy see the weight of inaction and increases the urgency to take action. The most effective closers are not just gathering data, they're creating an emotional experience for the prospect. By using numbers and emotional language, they make the problems feel more concrete. When Jeremy calculates how much his back pain has cost him over 6 months, that number hits different because he calculated it himself. Notice how the trainer uses Jeremy's timeline against him. Jeremy mentions dealing with this for months. The trainer asks, what if you're still dealing with this next year? He's taking Jeremy's own words about duration and projecting them into a future that feels unbearable. Jeremy starts to feel the weight of continued inaction. The secret to using connecting language that triggers prospects to take action naturally is making them feel like they're discovering obvious truths about their situation. You're not convincing them of anything new. You're helping them see what they already know but haven't fully processed. The trainer helps Jeremy realize that his back pain is expensive, getting worse, and affecting multiple areas of his life. These insights must be tested through active experimentation in real scenarios where you can practice guiding prospects to their own conclusions. Every prospect has one moment in their life that makes them ready to buy, but only master closers know how to find it and use it. Watch how the trainer identified and leveraged the turning point moment in the prospect's life story during that roleplay. He doesn't just ask about Jeremy's current back pain, he digs deeper to find the specific moment when Jeremy realized this problem needed to be solved now, not later. The trainer asks questions like, what made you finally decide to look for help? And what's different about this time compared to 6 months ago? These questions reveal the emotional trigger that brought Jeremy to this conversation. International closers often miss these crucial emotional anchors because they focus on surface level problems. They hear back pain and immediately start talking about solutions for back pain. But the real turning point isn't the pain itself. It's the moment when that pain started affecting something Jeremy cares about more than the pain. Maybe it was when he couldn't play with his kids. Maybe it was when he realized his work performance was suffering. Maybe it was when his wife mentioned she was worried about him. The technique of connecting turning points to current needs and future desires using natural English flow requires specific language patterns. Instead of asking, what's your main concern? You ask, what finally made you say enough is enough? The second question hits different because it assumes there was a specific moment of decision. It makes the prospect think about the emotional breaking point that brought them to you. Notice how the trainer uses phrases like "walk me through what happened" instead of "can you describe the situation?" The first phrase feels conversational and natural. It invites storytelling. The second phrase sounds like a medical interview. When prospects tell stories about their turning points, they relive the emotions that made them ready to buy. Those emotions are what close deals, not features and benefits. The specific language patterns for identifying and amplifying these pivotal moments involve asking about timelines in a way that reveals emotional shifts. How long have you been dealing with this? Gets you data. What made this week different from last month? Gets you the turning point. The trainer knows that something changed recently to make Jeremy take action, and he uses questions that uncover that change. Watch how the trainer seamlessly transitioned from discovery to pitch using the turning point as a bridge. Once he identified that Jeremy's turning point was realizing his back pain was affecting his sleep, which was affecting his work performance, which was affecting his income potential, the trainer connected their solution directly to that turning point. He didn't pitch a back pain program. He pitched a way for Jeremy to get back to performing at his highest level. This transition sounds natural because it uses Jeremy's own words and emotional framework. The trainer says something like, "So if we could get you back to sleeping through the night, that would solve the performance issue that's been bothering you," right? He's not introducing new concepts. He's connecting their solution to Jeremy's own turning point story. The pitch feels like a natural extension of the conversation instead of a sales presentation. The revelation that turning points are emotional, not logical, and your language must reflect that, changes everything about how you approach high-ticket sales. Logic tells Jeremy that back pain can be managed with exercises and better posture. Emotion tells Jeremy that he can't afford to keep losing sleep and missing opportunities because of this problem. The trainer speaks to the emotion, not the logic. Emotional language sounds different from logical language. Instead of saying, "Our program addresses chronic pain issues," you say, "This gets you back to being the person you were before this started." Instead of explaining features, you paint a picture of what life looks like when the turning point problem is resolved. The prospect doesn't want to understand your solution. They want to feel what it's like to have their turning point moment resolved. This technique represents the culmination of the learning cycle. From stilted academic speech to natural, persuasive communication. You start with concrete experience of missing turning points in your own sales calls. You move to reflective observation of how native speakers identify and use these moments. You develop abstract conceptualization of the language patterns that reveal turning points. Finally, you apply these patterns through active experimentation in real sales scenarios. The trainer shows us how to use the "why now" question to uncover turning points. Why are you looking at this now instead of 6 months ago? The question assumes something changed. It makes the prospect think about the specific trigger that brought them to this moment. That trigger is usually emotional, and it's always connected to something they value more than the problem itself. Master closers understand that turning points create urgency without sounding pushy. When Jeremy realizes his back pain turning point was about losing professional opportunities, the trainer doesn't have to create urgency around solving back pain. The urgency already exists around not losing more opportunities. The trainer just connects their solution to that existing urgency. The language patterns that amplify turning points involve reflecting the prospect's own emotional words back to them in question form. If Jeremy says he was frustrated about missing work, the trainer asks, "What was most frustrating about that situation?" This amplifies the emotional weight of the turning point moment. It makes the prospect feel that frustration again, which increases their motivation to solve the problem. The turning point technique transforms prospects from interested to committed because it connects your solution to their deepest motivations for change. Interested prospects want to know if your solution works. Committed prospects know they need to solve their turning point problem, and they see your solution as the path to resolution. The difference in closing rates between these two mindsets is massive. Mastering this represents the ultimate goal of natural English integration, using language that connects with prospects on an emotional level that drives real decisions. Knowing these techniques means nothing if you can't use them naturally when a real prospect is on the line. Here's how to make them instinctive. This is where the active experimentation phase comes in. This is where scenario-based role plays transform knowledge into natural ability. You've learned about the academic trap, mastered opening questions, questions, practice pain quantification, develop dot connecting language, and discover turning point techniques. But all of that stays academic unless you can use it naturally when money is on the line. Most international closers practice in isolation instead of using the peer feedback system that accelerates fluency. They record themselves alone in their room, repeating scripts until they sound robotic. They practice responses to common objections but miss the subtle language patterns that make those responses feel natural. They think solo practice will prepare them for real conversations, but it actually reinforces the stilted patterns they're trying to break. The complete role-play integration system changes everything. You start with specific scenarios that mirror your actual sales calls. Not generic practice your pitch scenarios, but detailed situations where you're talking to a prospect with back pain who's been dealing with it for 6 months and is worried about his work performance. The scenario includes the prospect's background, their specific pain points, their objections, and their personality type. Targeted phrase practice happens within these scenarios. You don't just practice saying, "How's your back been treating you?" in isolation. You practice transitioning into that question naturally after the prospect mentions they've been struggling. You practice responding to their answer with follow-up questions that feel conversational. You practice the entire flow until each phrase connects smoothly to the next one. The 4-step learning cycle creates continuous improvement in natural English usage through this system. Your concrete experience comes from the role play itself. You feel the awkward moments when your language doesn't flow naturally. Your reflective observation happens immediately after each role play when you and your partner discuss what worked and what didn't. Your abstract conceptualization develops as you identify patterns in your language that need improvement. Your active experimentation continues with the next role play where you test your refined approach. Scenario-based practice moves you from the pain state of stilted speech to seamless communication because it simulates real pressure. When you're in the middle of a role play and your partner throws you an unexpected objection, you don't have time to think about grammar rules. You have to respond naturally and immediately. This pressure forces you to access the natural language patterns you've been developing instead of falling back on academic formality. The transformation from academic knowledge to instinctive sales language mastery happens through repetition under realistic conditions. You practice the same opening question dozens of times with different prospects until it becomes automatic. You practice quantifying pain with various scenarios until you can do it without thinking. You practice connecting dots until you naturally guide prospects to their own conclusions. The knowledge becomes muscle memory. Peer feedback accelerates the process by catching subtle language patterns you might miss. Your practice partner hears when you slip into formal language modes that you don't notice. They catch when your tonality sounds uncertain even though your words are correct. They notice when you use phrases that native speakers wouldn't use in that context. This feedback is immediate and specific, which makes it much more effective than trying to evaluate yourself. The feedback system works both ways. When you're playing the prospect role, you experience firsthand how different language patterns feel from the receiving end. You notice when your partner sounds natural versus when they sound like they're reading from a script. You feel the difference between questions that make you want to open up and questions that make you want to end the call. This perspective makes you more aware of your own language patterns when you're in the closer role. The roleplay scenarios get progressively more challenging as your skills develop. You start with cooperative prospects who are easy to work with, then you move to skeptical prospects who challenge your assumptions. Then you practice with angry prospects who interrupt and object frequently. Finally, you work with sophisticated prospects who test your expertise and try to control the conversation. Each level requires more natural, confident language to maintain rapport and guide the conversation. The integration system includes specific drills for common problem areas. If you struggle with transitions between conversation topics, you practice scenarios that require smooth transitions. If you have trouble with objection handling, you practice scenarios where prospects throw multiple objections in rapid succession. If you sound uncertain during closing sequences, you practice scenarios that require confident, assumptive language. The system targets your specific weaknesses. Recording these role plays becomes crucial for identifying subtle patterns you miss in real time. You can hear exactly when your language sounds natural versus when it sounds forced. You can identify specific phrases that work well and phrases that create awkward moments. You can track your improvement over time as your natural language patterns become more consistent and confident. The complete system for integrating new vocabulary and idioms into natural, confident sales conversations requires consistent practice with immediate feedback. You practice new phrases in context until they feel natural. You get feedback on your delivery until your tonality matches native speakers. You repeat scenarios until your responses become automatic. The system transforms theoretical knowledge into practical ability. This systematic approach ensures that when you're on a real sales call with a real prospect, you're not thinking about language patterns or grammar rules. You're focused on understanding the prospect's needs and guiding them to the right solution. Your English flows naturally because you've practiced it until it became instinctive. Your confidence comes through in your voice because you know you can handle any conversation that comes your way. The transformation this creates for your closing success goes far beyond just sounding more natural. It fundamentally changes how prospects perceive and respond to you in high-stakes sales situations. The difference between six-figure closers and everyone else isn't talent. It's having a systematic approach to language mastery that most people never discover. You've seen the four-step cycle that transforms academic English into natural sales conversations. Now here's your challenge. Record your next sales call and identify your own academic trap moments using this system. Picture yourself 6 months from now. You're on a call with a high-value prospect. Your opening question lands with perfect confidence. Your pain quantification makes them feel the weight of inaction. Your dot-connecting language guides them to their own conclusions. Your turning point technique seals the deal naturally. That's your future when you master natural English integration.